Welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide, and this is the Outlaw Astrology podcast, a podcast that explores the mysterious and unexplained through the lens of astrology. And today we're going to talk about a perplexing mystery from the 20th century. And before we do so, some quick housekeeping. If you like APM's Astro Flow, please like, share, and subscribe. And review, give us 5 stars so other astro-curious people can find us too. And follow us, Outlaw Astrology Podcast, on Instagram, YouTube, and Pinterest. All links are in the show notes. Content warning, this episode and the next 2 discusses death, extreme weather conditions, and mysterious circumstances. So if this is not your thing, you can feel free to give it a pass. And with that being said, onward with the show. Okay, so we're going to set the cosmic stage here, and what happened is, if you've not heard of it, it is a mysterious event that happened about February 1st or 2nd of 1959, in which Igor Dyatlov, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, it's possible that I'm not, Russian is not my native language, obviously, but he assembled 11 hikers, and 9 ended up with him there was a total of 9 that ended up with him at the time of the event. 1 hiker had to return back, leave the hike because they were not physically fit enough to go on. They had health issues that required that they had to stop because they couldn't go on with the hike any longer. So it left the 9 alone in varying ages, mostly in their 20s, except for a 38-year-old hiker who was with the group. These were not inexperienced hikers. They were well-traveled hikers. They were very experienced. They had what was called a level 2, which was at that time, this is 1959, keeping in mind this happened in what was at that point Soviet Russia, and they started out in late January. It was very, very well planned. It wasn't like they decided to just go out and hike. They decided with a plan. They had their route planned out. They had the supplies they needed. They had tents. Everything seemed to have been accounted for and should have been planned and had been planned for. And yet, the thought that I think about when I think of events like these is that one does not know. That is what the unknown is about. One does not know. You can plan all you like and plan well, and still things can go for, step outside of what you think is possible. So in this case, let's look at the stars. So that's the setup. What happened was they all went out. They had a well-planned route. Everything was thought of. They told people. It wasn't like they went up there alone and unprepared. They were ready to go. And at some point, on either the 1st or the 2nd of February, something went terribly wrong. And for some reason, they cut themselves out of their tent and were not suitably dressed for the sub-zero temperatures nor for the deep snowfall. And they found different members. Eventually, they found all of them are no longer alive, deceased, in varying states of undress, with varying injuries and body parts missing. And for quite a few years, nobody knew what the mystery was. Nobody knew what happened. Everybody had a guess, because I've heard this story. I didn't know it was called this, but I have heard of it before. And it was a mystery that lasted for well over the 20th century until the 21st century, when we have some theories. And so Uranus was in Leo at that point, and it was squaring Neptune in Scorpio. Now you'll see that Leo is a fire sign, Scorpio is a water sign. So naturally there's a clash there. There is adventure. Wanting to go out and discover the unknown. Now, I am not the sort of person that likes to go out on hilltops and hang around. So you'll understand if I'm a bit squeamish on that sort of thing. So I don't understand people who feel the need to do such things. So they decided in early 59 to form that expedition. There were documents found, and it was named for the 21st Congress of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, and it might have been dispatched by a local organization. Igor Dyatlov was a 23-year-old radio engineering student at Ural Polytechnic Institute, now known as Ural Federal University, and he assembled a group of 9 others for a trip, most of which were fellow students and peers at the university. The initial group had 8 men and 2 women, but one member, as I stated, had to return back to camp. So at that point, grade 2 hikers, that was a lot of ski tour experience, and they would be getting their grade 3 certification upon their return. Candidates had to transverse 300 kilometers, that's 190 miles, and the route was designed by Dyatlov's group to reach the far northern regions of the Sverdlovsk Oblast and the upper streams of the Lozva River. And so the Sverdlovsk City Route Commission approved the route. So, as you can see, it was planned. People knew about it. It wasn't as if they just walked out there. They even planned very far ahead with the Committee of Physical Culture and Sport. They confirmed a group of 10 people. That was as early as the 8th of January. And the goal of the expedition was to reach Otorten, which is a mountain of 10 kilometers north of the site where the incident occurred, and this route was estimated to be a Category 3 and was undertaken in February, which is a very difficult time to transverse. On the 23rd, in 1959, the group issued their route book, listed their course, following the number 5 trail. At that time, the City Committee of Physical Culture and Sports listed approval for 11 people. The 11th person was named Semyon, and who was certified to go along with another expedition of similar difficulty. And the group left Sverdlovsk City on the same day as they received the route book. And as early as the 25th of 1959, they arrived at the northern province of Sverdlovsk Oblast in the early morning, and they took a vehicle to a village that was the last inhabited settlement in the north. On the 27th, they began their trek toward Gore Otorten. On the 28th, one member who had health ailments was forced to turn back because he was unable to continue the hike, and the remaining 9 hikers continued the trek. On the 31st, the group arrived on the edge of a highland area and began to prepare for climbing. And they went on to do that, and they were trying to get over a pass. And at one point, they began to lose their direction, and they deviated west, which was off course for them. When they realized they'd made a mistake, the group decided to camp on the slope of the mountain because they were farther away than they'd hoped, and rather than move down 100. So they were on the slope, and they could have moved down to a more safer, more forested area, which would have offered more shelter from the weather, but they chose not to do that. They didn't want to lose the altitude they gained, and so they decided to practice camping on a mountain slope. The group leader, Igor, decided he would send a telegram to the sports club as soon as the group reached a certain city, which is called Vizhai, I think, but I could be wrong. So they were trying to reach that on the 12th. They suspected that this would happen no later than the 12th, but he thought it might be longer. The 12th passed. There were no messages from the group. Delays of a few days are common with the expeditions. On the 20th, The travelers' relatives demanded a rescue operation, which included a few rescue groups, including other students and teachers. Later, the army and the military became involved, and as planes and helicopters were ordered to join the operation. On February 26th, the searchers found the group's abandoned and badly damaged tent on the slope where they had been. The search party was quite baffled because the tent looked like it had been ripped in half, and it was covered in snow, and it was empty. All the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. The investigators noted that the tent had been cut from the inside. There were 9 sets of footprints, and they noticed that some of the people were barefoot or only had a single shoe on or only socks, and the investigators followed down to a nearby wood, and all of the tracks were covered with snow, and it was just quite the mess. There was remains of a small fire. They found a few bodies, shoeless, dressed only in underwear. There were branches broken, suggesting some of the hikers climbed up to look for something, but no one knows exactly what. And the searchers found 3 more bodies, which included the group leader, who died in poses suggesting they were attempting to return to the tent. They were found at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters. That is 980, 1,570, and 2,070 feet from a tree. Finding the remaining 4 travelers took 2 more months, and on the 4th of May, under 4 meters of snow, which is 13 feet of snow, in a ravine about 75 meters, that's 246 feet, further in the woods near a pine tree, they found the other 4. They were better dressed than the others. There were signs that some of the clothing of those who died first had been removed for use by the others. And so some of them were wearing different items of clothing that had belonged to the previously found deceased hikers. Alrighty, so that is what we have so far, and that's when the investigation began. That's when the medical examination also began. When they recovered the bodies, they found at first no injuries that they could see had led to the death, and they assumed that everybody had died of hypothermia. There were injuries that did not make sense, like one of the people had a small crack in their head, in their skull, but they didn't think it was a fatal wound. 4 of the bodies that were found in May, that's when the narrative shifted. 3 of the hikers had fatal injuries. Major skull damage, chest fractures, and a force that could cause such damage in an extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash. So the speed of which, whatever the force was, it would be equivalent to a car crash. And the bodies had no external wounds that could be associated with bone fractures, so it's as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure. And it was quite cold. It was 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, which was negative 13 to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a storm brewing and blowing, and they were only partially dressed. You can see now how it's possible that this could look very sketch to lots of people. Injuries that don't seem to make sense with hypothermia, people not dressed properly. You know, why would you leave your safety of your warm tent in the night when the temperatures are clearly not favorable to you walking outside not properly attired? Now, let's have a quick look at the Trinity and lunation. The sun was in Aquarius, the moon was in Scorpio, and the ascendant was in Libra. This was a waning third quarter, so this is a crisis of consciousness, meaning, what do you do? you got a lot of questions here. What are you going to do? You know, you found yourself in a weather circumstance that was not planned for. If you're going to the mountains, you have to understand there will probably be a lot of cold given the elevation. So sometimes things get out of control, like the weather. And it was not the ideal time to go. February tends to be very cold in the northern hemisphere, particularly to those most northern parts of Europe and Eastern Europe. So not the most ideal time to go. And so a last quarter square would suggest a lot of challenge. Now the chart is primarily water and primarily fixed. So a lot of Scorpio energy. So the signature tends to be Scorpio. So fixed signs are determined, productive, capable of following through reliably. That makes sense. They literally did everything that one could possibly do. They planned ahead. They let everyone know where they were going. They were experienced hikers who were going to get their certification for the highest level of certification one could get in 1959. They had planned their route. They did their due diligence. They did everything they were supposed to do. Now, Earth manifests as being practical and productive, which, yes, you would absolutely want to make certain that if you're going to undertake this, that you have planned so that everybody involved can be safe. Lots of sextiles in the chart, so that's possibility. That is opportunity. Okay, and if we're looking at the hemispheres, the south holds sway. The south is basically about conscious and objective. That means the out there, the transpersonal, what everybody else is doing. And it tends to be more of an easterly, which means output stream, asserting your energy towards others into the environment. So this was done more of a challenge. That's my assessment, rather than, trying to do this to go get herbs or something. So as I said, Uranus in Leo squaring Neptune in Scorpio. And the reason why I mention that is there's a clash between adventure and the unknown. Uranus is hanging out in the 11th house in Leo. It's more important that we look at Uranus in this house first. That is the house it likes to be in, so that's great. But however, it's in Leo. And Leo is not a comfortable sign for Uranus to be in, because Uranus is the shot caller for Aquarius, and Leo is the sign opposing that, which is more comfortable in Leo being in a sun sign, being in the sun, or maybe even Mars, for example. So the unexpected is what Uranus brings whenever it appears in a chart. So it's awakening, and it's the unexpected. And in this case, the shocking change in the weather and the unexpected, that even though you have planned well and done your due diligence, look at that Pluto and Virgo, that sometimes you will get confused. That's Neptune and Scorpio. In this chart, Neptune is in the 2nd house of resources. And this is a fixed sign, so practical, steadfast, stick-to-itiveness. They would have said to themselves, I would have, stay calm, stay cool. If we keep our heads, we'll get out of this. We can make it, because the others didn't make it. So if you see people getting a little confused or afraid, you're going to make decisions that are going to be less ideal. By the way, most people would have thought this is their amygdala. It's only in some people, this is neuroscience, only in some people does the amygdala, which is supposed to be the one of the older parts of the brain, the reptilian brain, which is now in question in neuroscience, in the neuroscience field. This is still early days yet. So it's not like their amygdala went off, because not everybody's amygdala is very active. So at some point there was fear, maybe confusion definitely, but maybe some fear, which might allow for someone to run outside, not well planned for the weather. But whatever happened made it necessary for them to act without having a clear, defined plan. Everything up until this point was very clear, very easy, planned. And at some point, the weather shifted, and they decided that instead of going to the forest where they would have had more cover, they ended up on that slope because they didn't want to lose altitude. They had a goal that they were trying to get to. And so Neptune's about illusion and confusion and resources. And so when you're looking at that, it's like, okay, might have gotten confused. We have the resources. We can do this. And it also, in Scorpio, is about vulnerability. Having faith in your ability to get through something. So the ones who were found later in May were dressed more appropriately because they clearly had seen what happened to the other group and thought to themselves, if we have a greater chance of survival if we're appropriately attired and if we come off this slope, which is what they did. They were found near a creek, by the way. And so Neptune in Scorpio speaks to one's vulnerabilities and maybe not being able to see how vulnerable one is. And that could lead to confusion and also lead to making choices that might prove to be unwise. So like I said, a clash between adventure or the unexpected and the unknown. A storm blew up and they had each other, but it was an unexpected shift in the group due to a extreme weather event that led to the fallout. Okay, so Saturn is in Scorpio, and that can also speak to harsh mountain conditions and tests of endurance. It was bloody cold, and hiking is no joke. You have to definitely plan. You can't just climb to the top of a mountain. You have to prepare. It's very cold, and it's not unusual for hikers, even experienced hikers, to suffer from frostbite, which I can tell you, having done it at least a few times in my life, it is an excruciatingly painful experience that must be handled well when one returns to safety. But what does one do when you don't have the proper medical supplies and the proper supplies period to handle such an event that, yes, you planned for it to be cold, you just didn't know a storm was about to blow up. Okay? And so last week we have, as we set the stage, we have Pluto and Virgo. So we got transformation through detailed investigation. That would come after. Now, Saturn is hanging out in the fourth house of house belonging. So these groups, I'd say they, from what I'm reading, pretty close-knit. They knew each other rather well. Pluto is hanging out at the... This is a night chart, by the way. I forgot to mention that, but it is, so bear with me. Pluto's hanging out in the 12th house, which is hidden traits. So that's detailed investigation, planning, being very detail-oriented, and the investigation would go on for a very long time and would also be detail-oriented. So we've got 9 souls under those same stars, and basically they're all very close in age, being born about 1935 to about 1937, and the eldest being born in 1921. That's 9 people. There's a lot of charts to do, which I have. That's way too many charts for me to do for this particular episode. So what we're going to do is focus on the stars. Now Mars was in Leo, and Pluto. Mars was actually. Let me double check before I say that. No, Mars is in Taurus. Mars is in Taurus, so kind of stubborn, kind of let's stick to the plan kind of vibe. You know, it would have made sense to keep on keeping on as much as you could. I mean, you come this far, maybe you could go further. Because what I don't see in the reports that I'm looking at is that they said, you know what, we should probably turn around and go back. This isn't going to work out. We've already lost a lot of the people in our group. We should turn around and leave. So I'm getting the sense, or at least my interpretation is, that maybe they thought they could still find some way to save the expedition, as it were. So we have Mars in Taurus, and we have Pluto in Virgo. Mars is at 25 degrees. Thought I'd share. And we've got Pluto hanging out at the bottom, where is it at? In the 12th house. Pluto's at 3 degrees. Mars and Pluto are actually in what would look like a trine by element, but is actually, point of fact, a square. Because Pluto's at 3 degrees in early Virgo, that's actually a square, so it's called a dissociate square, in that I say it's probably playing a little bit more friendly because these two planets are both in Earth signs, but it makes it the potential for very forceful events, particularly because Mars and Pluto are both very forceful planets. Pluto is considered the higher octave of Mars, so Mars in Taurus is stubborn and has a certain determination and stick-to-itiveness. In normal circumstances, this is ideal. But would it be ideal if you're in a situation where things have gone pear-shaped rather quickly? And this is not to blame the hikers in any way, shape, or form, simply to say that even when we feel our most capable, we are also sometimes have blind spots. Consider that the 12th house is also unconscious blind spot, that sometimes detailed planning doesn't always lead to the best outcomes or doesn't save you from those outcomes. The moon is in Scorpio, so Mars is hanging out in the 8th house, which is where Pluto tends to prefer to be, and Pluto's hanging out in the collective unconscious realm that is known as the 12th house. So that's hidden habits and also the unconscious. So they might not have, and most certainly were not aware that one can plan so studiously to the detail and still have things just go completely pear-shaped out of control. And so moon in Scorpio, we're looking at not unusual circumstances. I would say we're looking at vulnerability, in emotional vulnerabilities, that you would be afraid. Moon is about your safety needs. Your goal would be to share that vulnerability, safety in numbers, so you have the greatest chance of survival. Now that moon is hanging out in the 2nd house, and it's at 11 degrees. And that's basically the Aquarian degree. So yes, group dynamics, unusual circumstances. Circumstances most certainly were unusual. They were ending up in an extreme weather event, had already lost friends and colleagues, and we're still trying to figure out how the hell are we getting out of here. So that 11 degrees is saying, yes, group dynamics, safety in numbers. Let's get together and try to pool our resources and see if we can get the hell out of here. Okay? And so we've got the cosmic forensics is what I'm calling it. So the transits at that point is emphasis. We're going to be looking at the outer planet activation. So let's do so quite quickly. I don't want to overload anybody. I just want to give you something to think about. So, already talked about Pluto and Uranus, which are in the 2 adjacent houses. Uranus is in the 11th of community, so unexpected group dynamics, unusual circumstances, and, you could also see a self-expression in play. Some people enjoy hiking as a hobby, so it's like, definitely a hobby, but definitely unexpected happening to your community. And Pluto would be a transformation, which also could be, death. Let me find. Chiron is hanging out at 21 degrees in Aquarius in the 5th house. So being able to innovate, because the interesting thing about extreme circumstances is that unusual occurrences, unexpected, you have to think outside of your comfort zone. That's what the moon stands for. The moon stands for I'm vulnerable, I'm scared. Sometimes that means you withdraw and you close down. But the sun is also in the 5th house. It's also at the 11th degree, just like the moon. they are enjoying a square. So the sun and the moon are in a square, as I've said. This is a last quarter square. They're both at the 11th degree. And so this is definitely about group dynamics and usual circumstances and the hope that one can survive said circumstances with the others who are still living, trying to do the best that we can, is how I would see that. As I've said, Neptune is in Scorpio. It is 5 degrees off that moon. So that's a pretty wide conjunction. And that basically means confusion. Absolutely confusion. And let's find out. Let's see what Jupiter is doing. Because I like to know. Jupiter is also in Scorpio. And it's also at the 28th degree. That is a 1 type of energy. So bold, action, independence. Let's figure it out. We can do this kind of vibe. Okay? And Saturn is at 2 degrees of Capricorn. It is at home in Capricorn, but it's in the 4th house where Saturn is not known to like it. This is a group that had a leader, and a very experienced leader, a diligent leader, and this simply goes to show that the unknown is going to tap you on the shoulder, even when you've planned, even when you think you've got it together, even when you have it together, even when you have the support of your community behind you. Things can still go awry. Now, let me talk about Chiron briefly. In Aquarius, this is a collective wound and a healing journey. That basically means that's 5th house, that's speculative. That could also be about the future. The hope that we'll find an answer. The hope that we will understand. The hope that one day this will all make sense. Now we're going to take a quick look at the nodes. And that would be the lunar nodes. The south node is at 15 degrees of Aries. And the north node is at 15 degrees of Libra. The ascendant is 1 degree off at 16. So that basically says that the energy is being diplomatic, working together, making compromises, as opposed to independent, go off on your own, follow your own trail, do your own thing type of vibe. And so the energy is learning to integrate independence with teamwork, because I believe that they did their best, that they worked as a team to the best of their ability. And like I said, Uranus hanging out in the 11th house brings the unexpected. The chart ruler, by the way, is Venus. And Venus is hanging out in the 6th house, at 0 degrees, and it's in Pisces. So faith. And sometimes faith in, in ourselves, in our abilities, we have a tendency to have an optimism bias. And because these people, all of them, were human, they too might have had that bias. Okay? So that's where I think we're going to stop for this particular episode, because I believe I could probably talk forever and ever on the topic. But we're going to go on for next week and discuss even more about this topic and how astrology can help us understand the mysterious, the unexplained, the unknown. Not so that we can just anticipate it, so that sometimes we can navigate it with a great deal more understanding and compassion for ourselves. Because as we've explored today, the stars tell a story of transformation through mystery. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes not from finding all of the answers. Instead, it comes from learning to sit with the questions. Because as Trinity says in the Matrix to Neo, it is the questions that drive us. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and your mind open to the mysteries. This is APM. Peace and astro magic, star people.